man-rated. We heard it again in that film. What exactly does man-rated mean?
Man-rated means that although there is no crew inside the ATV during the flight, the very, very strict requirements of a manned vehicle do apply to the ATV, since it will dock to the station and host the ISS astronauts.
So in other words, there are no men, but there could be men. Is that what you're saying?
There will be when it's docked to the station. So it has to have the same standards as the manned vehicle.
All right, new ground stations you heard about, also a new control center for the ATV in Toulouse in southern France, and that's the subject of the next film. In a few moments, the ATV will dock with the International Space Station. To succeed in this delicate maneuver, the European Space Agency called on the French Space Agency, CNES, to develop a control center in Toulouse, France, for ATV flight operations. It'll be staffed by the men and women from the Space Center in Toulouse and will work in coordination with the Johnson Space Center in Houston and the Korolev Space Center in Moscow. Together, these three will coordinate the ground installations and carry out all operations necessary for each mission. 3 teams participate in these operations. ESA is responsible for defining the ATV mission. The director of the ESA mission maintains overall control over operational activities. CNES, led by its flight director, oversees all operations and ATV automatic navigation maneuvers throughout the mission. The CNES team checks the flight plans generated on board the ATV and can intervene to change them. Once docked, the ATV becomes a module of the International Space Station but remains under control of the CNES team. The third team is made up of specialists who have been part of the ATV development and manufacture. Their knowledge complements that of the operational teams during preparation and execution of the mission. Once the flight control team has positioned the ATV at 40 kilometers from the space station, a Hertzian link is established between the two vehicles. Docking operations can now begin. The team in Toulouse will work with the Russian and U.S. space centers to coordinate activities stemming from the 3 control centers. Toulouse will also ensure functioning of ground installations. These coordinated activities of the space station and the 3 control centers in Houston, Moscow, and Toulouse represent a first, and CNES is proud to participate. The ATV Control Center in Toulouse, their activity starts at 100 minutes after the launch. A big part of the ATV's role is in reboosting the space station.
Yes, the ISS is in fact not so far from the Earth, only 400 kilometers. So at regular intervals, the ATV will reboost the ISS into a higher orbit to overcome the effects of the drag of remaining atomic oxygen molecules, which remain in the very, very high atmosphere.
So the station actually loses about, 100 meters a day because of this, in altitude, because of this atmospheric drag.
Yes, depending on the altitude of the station, of course, but they might lose some several hundreds of meters a day, up to several hundreds of meters a day. But this also depends on the region of the Earth, due to the uneven distribution of the gravity on the Earth.
We have a replay coming up for you of the liftoff, which occurred about 45 minutes ago, and then we're going to go to an interview with Jean-François Clairvaux here in Jupiter, downstairs, the senior astronaut advisor to the ATV program, and an astronaut himself, France's 5th man in space, as a matter of fact, and he's going to be telling us all about how the astronauts on board the ISS are going to be using the ATV. So as soon as those gentlemen are ready downstairs, we'll go with our interview with Jean-François Clairvaux, France's 5th man in space. Meanwhile, everything is on board. We're still coasting in our coasting phase. Separation of the ATV coming up shortly. Before that, we'll have the second lighting of the upper stage. That'll be at the very end of the interview that you're about to see with Jean-François Clairvaux.
Merci.
Well, thank you
very much to our colleagues up in the commentators' booths. So I'm here with Jean-François Clairvoy for about 15 minutes, and we're going to try to give you some additional information. We're not talking about things from the point of view of the ATV, but from the point of view of the crew. The crew are actually on board the ISS. Now, obviously I'm going to start by saying, well, how does it work? Let's try and explain things. The starting point for the mission, you've already seen this, it was this tremendous liftoff of the launcher with the ATV. The point of arrival is going to be here in the main axis of the space station. You have to imagine what it looks like. It's quite an impressive structure, 110 meters by 70. And you can see there are two parts. There's the Russian part, that's this one. Then you have this link, and then the American part. Here you have the Columbus module, that's the European one, and the future Japanese module will be here. And the ATV arrives from the rear onto the Zvezda module, the Russian module. So the docking element is the Russian one, isn't it?
Yes, quite. It's the same docking part that the Russians have been using for years, even tens of years now, when they go dock the station.
So it's a tried and tested system.
Oh yes, there have been more than 50 dockings.
Take a look at this in further detail. We have this cross-section of the ATV that gives you a better idea. There are three parts in the ATV. You've got the docking section here with the central rod. I'll say more about that later. It's a tukabai in the Japanese version. And here you have the pressurized module for the cargo, for the freight. Jean-François, you're familiar with that, aren't you?
Well, that's the living area. That's where the crew will come, connect pipes, feed their own tanks in water, etc., and get the various bags there with clothes, etc., and present from their families, as usual.
Yes, I think that there are all sorts of, what you can call it, some thingamajigs in there. Then you have the unpressurized part, the engine room, so to speak. And here you've got the tanks, and on the other side as well, not just here. Here you have the propellant for the Russian part.
Yes, and the Russian propellant will be fed into the station through pipes which automatically connect at the time of docking. So no special operation from the crew.
So you have tanks for the air, water, and here you have the propulsion module with propellant modules as well, and the system itself, the attitude motors, you've got them up here, and the four nozzles right at the back that are not very large, are they?
No, you're quite right. These nozzles have a thrust of a couple of hundreds of newtons, something like 10 kilograms only. They're very small jets, so they won't accelerate it a lot, but the movement will be slow but very accurate.
What about the acceleration? There's hardly any, is there?
In case it has to be ejected into a parking orbit, the G for the crew would be 3,000th of a G.
Well, the question we're all wondering about, because you've been involved in this program, is given that it's an automatic, autonomous vehicle that's capable of taking its own decisions with its own software, what would you be doing in this program? They don't need an astronaut here, do they?
Well, that's true, not at the time of launch at least, but at the time of closing, then I have a role to play. You know, when this sort of tug approaches, arrives in the vicinity of the station, normally the crew has nothing to do, but still they have a number of means available, number of controls available in order to send commands for the ATV to stop or withdraw if necessary.
So we have now seen what the system looks like. Together with Jean-François, let's now get inside the Zvezda module. The crew that's in there, what is it going to have in the way of information available to it? Because the crew members are going to be there viewing what's going on, and ultimately, if necessary, they're going to be involved directly. But viewing it, they'll see the arrival.
Well, the crew isn't indispensable for docking, but the crew has an interface available, which is rather simple.